This is Gagagigo. You might recognize him from some cards you've seen before or some situations you've been in during duels. From protecting your own monsters with My Body as a shield, to being locked out of your favorite summoning mechanic in Dimensional Barrier. Unless of course you use Link monsters. Gagagigo shows up in quite a few unsuspecting places in Yu-Gi-Oh! And no, it's not by coincidence. This anthropomorphic reptile actually has a surprisingly long story, one you can only piece together by carefully studying all of the art he appears in. So let's talk about it. Let's talk about the lore of Gagagigo. Gagagigo's story begins with a young lad named Gigobite, a reptile with a tranquil soul but that carries a destiny that one day his heart shall be tainted by evil. He lived carefree among other little creatures as seen in the various normal spells and traps we currently have. Moki Moki, Mushroom Man, Petite Dragon, and Haniwa, some just banger normal monsters from the early years of Yu-Gi-Oh! The band was a fearsome bunch, or at least they tried to be, tackling many foes twice their size, including the fearsome Manticore of Darkness. At some point, Gigobite came into contact with the Charmers. It's unclear how. Perhaps the spellcasters managed to save the gang from the Manticore's impending grasp. Regardless, the meeting led to Gigobite willingly becoming a familiar of Aria the Water Charmer. There are some interpretations of the Gagagigo lore that suggest this event happened before our protagonist met the other normal monsters. Though the fact that we see Petite Dragon also become a familiar to Wind the Wind Charmer sort of dissuades this idea. Thus, Gigobite and Petite Dragon parted ways with Moki Moki, Mushroom Man, and Haniwa. They would presumably never see each other again. There aren't too many cards that depict the epic adventures of Gigobite and Aria. At minimum, we know that the duo worked together for quite some time. We see in Triangle Power Gigobite's transformation into Gigabite, which I can't really tell if this is supposed to be some sort of Pokemon-like evolution, a transformation through the Charmer's magic, or just your average teenage growth spurt. Regardless, Gigabite remained fierce by Aria's side. Eventually, he matured further into Gagagigo. Here, Aria decided to release her reptile companion. We can only assume she wanted the creature to have the opportunity to live his life as he wished after doing so much for her. And so Gagagigo was free, as were the other familiars. At least until he got into a fight with Freed the Brave Wanderer. Now, some iterations of the story claim that Gagagigo had become hungry and started the skirmish with the Wanderer while trying to steal food from his encampment. There are cards that vaguely support this, namely those pertaining to Marauding Captain, a character who will show up later in the story, and it doesn't seem like an act completely out of character for our protagonist, who, as we previously discussed, was a rather naive child. Though I'd like to propose a more valiant reason for Gagagigo's pivotal confrontation. There's a trap card called Ice Band that showcases the reptile and goblin attack force trying to ice skate in what resembles Lemuria the Forgotten City. Perhaps after leaving Aria, instead of becoming this mindless food-craving gremlin, Gagagigo had befriended the goblins. They formed a tight-knit family, as did the normal monsters of the past, and sought to challenge whatever warriors they could. One day, the goblins took on more than they could handle, raiding an army's camp as seen in an assault on GHQ. Gagagigo rushed in to save them, though met his match in Freed. The reptile did put up a good fight, all things said. He had learned much during his childhood, much at Aria's side. Yet, he could not anticipate the power Freed heralded. The Wanderer had access to the different dimension, an alternative plane of darkness and decay. He banished Gagagigo there, as seen in Dimensional Prison. Why Freed did not simply kill the creature right there and then is unclear. Maybe mercy? Pity? Regardless, Gagagigo could only watch helplessly from his newfound prison as the remaining goblins were slaughtered in front of his very eyes. A glint of malevolence brewing in his heart, he vowed to avenge his brethren, to make the Wanderer one day pay for his actions. For a while, Gagagigo wandered aimlessly through the different dimension. It was a vast, treacherous place that he knew very little about. Though one name seemed to echo constantly throughout its confines, that of Invader of Darkness. Gagagigo wondered if this figure could be the key to escaping the different dimension. But was it a benevolent or an evil force? The reptile would quickly receive his answer as he was captured by the invader's forces. He was designated as a sacrifice for the fiend's rituals and placed in a cell until his scheduled tribute. Gagagigo was not alone in his cage. He was accompanied by a tree spirit caught in flames, Blazing Inpachi, and a beaten warrior, Marauding Captain. For whatever reason, however, the Blazing Homunculus began to attack its cellmates. This is where I'm going to have to give you all a quick context dump. Marauding Captain is actually one of the soldiers of Freed the Brave Wanderer. He just so happened to be in the different dimension, having been exiled by his superior for causing a humiliating defeat. Under any other circumstance, Marauding Captain would have revolted at the sight of Gagagigo, a creature that had previously opposed his brothers. In this situation, however, he and the reptile were forced to become allies. Also, just so you know, sometime before his exile, Marauding Captain actually cut a not so on fire Impachi into pieces. So yeah, the tree spirit's crash out is kinda justified here. Anyhow, it's not evident how long this battle dragged on for. Regardless, Marauding Captain gained respect for Gagagigo and vice versa. At one point, Impachi briefly gained the upper hand and cast a fireball at the reptile, who was vulnerable in a corner. But before Gagagigo could be hit, Marauding Captain cast himself in front of him. The reptile was caught off guard by this act of selflessness, though managed to use the extra time provided to him to defeat Blazing Impachi. At this point, Marauding Captain and Gagagigo had complete trust in one another. They vowed to escape the hold of Invader of Darkness and plotted a prison breakout. By some means, maybe pickpocketing a guard, they left their cage and rallied the many exiled force around them. The New Alliance marched on the tyrant, hoping to bring him down for good. Yet, Invader of Darkness proved much more troublesome than Marauding Captain and Gagagigo could have anticipated. His troops chipped away at their rings until the Fiend himself dawned on the battlefield. Invader cast a beam of energy forward at one of the exiled force, but Gagagigo, being inspired by the actions of Marauding Captain, threw himself in front of the man. It is entirely possible that the person we see in Absolute End could actually be Marauding Captain himself, just with some additional armor on. It would be somewhat poetic again, given the events of my body as a shield. But I would agree with existing interpretations of Gagagigo's lore that paint this person as just some random prisoner. Again, they don't quite resemble our heroic captain. On top of this, I think Gagagigo protecting a stranger adds more depth to his character. He's willing to sacrifice himself for those in need without question. In any case, Invader's blast severely wounded Gagagigo. Completely demolished, the Alliance retreated. Marauding Captain took his comrade into his arms and dashed away, searching for a way to heal him before he could die. There was a well-renowned scientist in the different dimension named Kozaki. Desperate for any sort of aid, Marauding Captain brought Gagagigo to him. They entered his level conversion lab where resuscitation of the reptile began. Between Kozaki's reassuring words and his own need to discuss the next course of action with the exiled force, Marauding Captain entrusted the scientist to save his friend and departed. But Kozaki's mind had long been corrupted by the eldritch knowledge of the different dimension. His acceptance of Gagagigo was less as that of another patient, but more so as that of a novel test subject. Our protagonist was subject to many grueling experiments. Towards the end, Gagagigo was indeed healed, but he emerged in a form much more sinister than that which he had been. Gagagigo was now Giga Gagagigo. Per his flavor text, in order to fight tremendous evil, he gained formidable power through body reconstruction, but lost his heart and his redemption. Upon the reptile's revival, Kozaki added one more experiment to his list, that of testing Giga Gagagigo's strength. He unleashed his weapon on the different dimension. Giga Gagagigo was overcome by bloodlust. He cleaved through everything he could find, including this random venom cobra as seen in Ambush Fangs. Marauding Captain was quick to discover the monstrosity that was once his friend, but was unfortunately helpless to stop him. Remembering only the rage from his journey, Giga Gagagigo quickly sought out two of his previous opponents, Blazing Impachi and Invader of Darkness. He cleaved through Impachi with ease. Invader of Darkness proved a bit challenging, but what would have previously taken armies now took a single creature. The mutilated behemoth put an end to the Fiend, stealing his garments as crude trophies of the victory. Kozaki was impressed by his creation's strength. Yet, he yearned for a better display of power. He transformed Giga Gagagigo into Go Giga Gagagigo. Yeah, the name is kinda silly. For my own sake in recording this video, because I'm already tripping trying to say the previous name, I'm just gonna start calling him Gagagigo at this point. Anyhow, Gagagigo had become a shell of what he once was, a mindless beast that only knew violence. Satisfied with his progress, Kozaki loaded his specimen into his compulsory evacuation device. He launched Gagagigo through the monster gate back into the real world. Given some of the other cards you will see soon, we can only assume Marauding Captain snuck into the scientist's lab and followed him. Now back in his original dimension, Gagagigo had but one goal, to kill the man that had inadvertently caused him this state, Freed the Brave Wanderer. Though after some training and recognition from his higher-ups, the man was now known as Freed the Maxless General. Gagagigo dashed straight for the general's fortress. If the Invader of Darkness couldn't hold back the menace, neither could mere mortals. He ripped through Freed's men with ease. Freed tried to put up a fight, but was bested quickly. The time came for the final blow. But before it could fall, Marauding Captain cast himself in front of Freed. He pleaded Gagagigo to stop, believing that somewhere inside this husk, his friend was still there. The reptile stopped. Memories began to flood his head. Of his time as a child alongside Moki Moki, Mushroom Man, Petite Dragon, and Haniwa, who had tackled foes larger than any of them combined out of pure naivety. of his adventures with Arya, the water charmer, who had helped him learn much about the world and allowed him to grow up strong and healthy, of his battle alongside the goblins, who had shown him new places he could have never imagined and served as a family for some time, and of his companionship with the man before him, marauding captain, who had saved him back in a different dimension and willingly marched by his side against the invader of darkness. Gagagigo managed to break free from Kozaki's control. He had returned, now Gagagigo the Risen. He understood the many crimes he had committed both here and in the different dimension, and sought to atone for his sins. Is this the end of Gagagigo's wacky story? Not exactly. Gagagigo the Risen is actually featured in a few cards like Dimensional Barrier, as alluded to in this video's intro, where he is seen getting sealed by something. Maybe freed again? That would be kind of unfortunate. Our protagonist is also seen in Overlay Capture, having his Xseed materials stripped from him by Swordbreaker. There aren't enough cards at this moment in my eyes to extrapolate a complete narrative for this new chapter of our favorite reptile. If I were to speculate though, I'd say that on his quest to redeem himself, Gagagigo gets into disputes with people he had accidentally wronged while under Kozaki's control. If you all have any ideas, I'd love to hear them all in the comment section below. Otherwise, yeah, that's Gagagigo's entire story. Nothing super long or complex, but in my eyes, a pretty neat piece of lore that manages to tie in a lot of generic Yu-Gi-Oh cards from back in the day. Yeah, Konami is still making some really cool stories in the present with things like Diabellstar or Branded, but there's something just innately charming about the simplicity of a random dude protecting a lizard just because he felt like it was the right thing to do. Like, what a true bro. Anyhow, I hope you all enjoyed the video today. My entire channel revolves around talking about Yu-Gi-Oh lore, so if you like what you've seen today, feel free to check out my other content or even subscribe. There's a Patreon link below if you wish to support me, also a Discord link if you seek to chat about all things Yu-Gi-Oh! Otherwise, I hope you have a good night.